She was standing in front of a painting she clearly hated, smiling like she loved it, and I knew in that exact moment I was in trouble. Hi, my name is Jesse Ward. I'm 30 years old and I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where I build custom furniture for people who want things that last. I've known Nora Blake for 7 years, long enough to know exactly which smile is real and which one she puts on when she's being polite. That night at the gallery opening, she was being very polite. The workshop was Nora's idea originally, or rather, her showing up there was. 3 years into knowing each other, she'd come by one afternoon to drop something off and had ended up staying for 4 hours because, she said, the ambient noise was good for concentration. I hadn't argued. She'd brought her laptop and her headphones and had sat in the corner on the old wooden stool and worked while I built things, and the radio played something neither of us had picked. She came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. It became a thing without either of us deciding it was a thing. She had a key after the 3rd month, not because I gave it to her, but because she'd once arrived before me and stood outside for 20 minutes and I'd felt terrible about it, and said here and handed over the spare. She'd looked at it for a second and then put it in her pocket like it was nothing, like it was obvious. She never mentioned having it, I never mentioned giving it. Those Tuesday evenings were their own particular shape of the week. She worked, I worked, the radio played. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. She'd look up and ask me something, about wood, about a client, about nothing important, and I'd answer and she'd nod and go back to her screen. I'd finish a piece and show her, and she'd look at it seriously and say what she actually thought, which was more useful than what most people said. I told myself this was friendship. What friends do, comfortable proximity, shared space, the easy shorthand of two people who knew each other's habits. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. I just wasn't ready to know it yet. One Tuesday in particular I keep coming back to. She'd been at the stool for 2 hours, working on something that was clearly frustrating her. I could tell by the sound of her typing, which changed when she was annoyed. Around 9, she pushed back from the counter and looked at the ceiling and said, "I hate this client." "Which one?" "The restaurant. They keep asking me to make the logo look more approachable, without being able to define what approachable means to them." "What does it mean to you?" She looked at me. "Warm colors, rounded edges, something that looks like it was made by a person." "Then do that," I said, "and show them why it's right." She looked at the ceiling again, then she looked back at her screen. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." She went back to work. I went back to the cabinet I was fitting. 20 minutes later, she turned the laptop around so I could see. It was exactly what she'd described. Warm, rounded, human. I looked at it for a moment. "That's the one," I said. She looked at it. "Yeah," she said, "it is." She sent it to the client and packed up her things. At the door she paused, the way she always paused, that half second before she actually left. "Same time next week?" "Same time," I said. She nodded, left. I stood in the empty workshop for a while after that. The radio was still playing. The cabinet was half fitted on the workbench. The stool in the corner still had the slight indentation where she always sat. Same time next week. It had never been a question. That was what I hadn't let myself examine. She'd been invited by a client. Small local art show, white wine, people in expensive shoes talking about negative space. Nora was wearing a green dress and her hair down, and she was standing in front of an enormous abstract canvas that looked like someone had dropped a bucket of rust-colored paint from a significant height and called it intentional. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were somewhere else entirely. I'd come because she'd texted at 6 that morning. "Jesse, gallery thing tonight. I don't want to go alone. Please." No punctuation on the please, which meant she actually meant it. I'd been in the middle of sanding a table. I'd stopped immediately. I hadn't told her that. I got there late, still in my work clothes. Sawdust probably still somewhere on me. I spotted her from across the room. The green dress, the polite smile, the eyes somewhere else. A woman beside me, someone's mother, from the look of it, kind face, good earrings, glanced between Nora and me and said, "Is that your wife? She has wonderful taste." I didn't think. I just answered the way you answer something that already feels true. "Yeah," I said, "she does." The woman smiled and moved on. I stood there for a second with the words still in my mouth. Across the room, Nora had turned. She'd heard me. I could tell by the way she went very still, the polite smile fading into something I couldn't read from that distance. Our eyes met. Then someone stepped between us. And by the time they moved, she was looking at the painting again, like nothing had happened. But her cheeks were pink, and that wasn't the wine. I knew the difference. 7 years is a long time to know someone, long enough that their silences have different textures, the comfortable kind, the thinking kind, the something's wrong kind. On the drive home that night, Nora was quiet in a way I couldn't quite place. Not the comfortable kind, not quite the something's wrong kind either. Something in between, something careful. She looked out the passenger window at the harbor lights for most of the drive. She had her shoes off, she always took them off in the car, had since the first time I drove her somewhere, and her feet on the dashboard and her arms crossed loosely over her chest. The rust one wasn't even the worst, she said finally. There was a blue one in the back room that looked like it was painted by someone who'd just gotten very bad news about their taxes. I laughed. She smiled at the window. Not the polite one, the real one. I'd learned to tell the difference a long time ago. I'd just never said so out loud. When I pulled up to her building, she gathered her shoes and her bag and paused with her hand on the door. She didn't get out right away. She looked down at her shoes, then at some middle distance between us. "Jessie, yeah," a pause. "What you said tonight, to that woman." I waited. "Did you mean it? Or was it just—" She stopped, started again. Was it easier than explaining? I should have answered. I had an answer. It had been sitting in my chest since the moment the word left my mouth and felt entirely accurate. But something in me, 7 years of calling it friendship, 7 years of the safe, comfortable shape of what we were, went quiet instead of speaking. "It was just easier," I said. She nodded once, got out, didn't slam the door, just closed it, the careful way, and walked into her building without looking back. I sat in the car for a long time after that. The harbor lights were still on the water. The word was still in my mouth. Yeah, she does. I'd meant it. I just hadn't been brave enough to say so. The next week was wrong in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. Nothing had happened, that was the thing. No fight, no conversation, no moment I could point to. Just Nora being slightly quieter than usual, responding to texts a little slower. The particular absence of the small things, the random photo she'd send of something she found funny, the voice message at odd hours, the Tuesday evening she'd started spending at my workshop because she said she worked better with background noise. I noticed all of it. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was nothing. People got busy. 7 years of easy proximity didn't just end because of one word at a gallery. I sanded tables and hung cabinet doors and drove home through Charleston in the evenings and told myself I wasn't watching my phone. I was watching my phone. "Friday night," she texted. "Coming to the farmer's market tomorrow? Need a second opinion on a print for the hallway." I replied immediately. "Yeah, what time?" She sent back a time and nothing else. No joke, no extra sentence, just the time. I stared at it for a while. Nora had never sent me just a time in 7 years. There was always something else. A comment, a question, a stray thought. Just a time meant she was being careful. I didn't know what to do with careful. Careful wasn't us. The market was crowded on Saturday morning the way it always was in September. Local honey, fresh bread, the smell of coffee from the corner stand that never had enough tables. Nora was waiting at the print stall when I arrived. She had her hair up and her glasses on. She only wore them when she wasn't thinking about being seen, and she was holding two small prints side by side and frowning at them with total concentration. I stopped a few feet away and watched her for a second. She didn't know I was there yet. She was entirely herself in that moment. No performance, no awareness of being observed, just her looking at two prints and trying to figure out which one was right. The morning light was catching her hair. She was biting her lips slightly the way she did when she was deciding something. I'd seen this version of her 1,000 times. The thought that arrived then was very simple and very clear. I don't want to stop seeing it. She looked up and found me standing there, Something moved across her face, quick like she'd been caught at something. Then she held up both prints. Left or right? Left, I said. She looked at it again. I was going to say right. Then why did you ask me? Because I wanted a second opinion, not confirmation. I bought us both coffee while she paid for the print. We walked the market without a list, the way we always had, stopping when something was interesting, moving on when it wasn't. She found a jar of local fig jam and held it up like evidence. You need this. I have 3 jars of jam. You have 2, I counted. I looked at her. She was already reaching for her wallet. Nora, it's fig, she said firmly. You're getting it. We walked back to her car with the print and the jam and 2 empty coffee cups, and the morning felt almost like it always had. Almost. There was still something careful in her, something held back. I could feel it the same way I could feel a table that wasn't quite level. You couldn't always see it, but you knew. At her car, she turned and looked at me directly for the first time all morning. Jessie, yeah, I'm not good at this, she said. At not knowing what something means. I looked at her, she looked back. The market noise moved around us. Me neither, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she got in her car and drove away. I stood in the parking lot holding my empty coffee cup. She'd bought me the jam, she'd come to the market. She was telling me something in the only way she knew how. Sideways, careful, without saying it directly. I understood, I just didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. In August, a month before the gallery, Nora had a difficult week. A client rejected a project she'd spent 6 weeks on. Not badly, just completely. Wrong direction, start over. Here's a new brief that was entirely different from the original one. She found out on a Thursday afternoon, and I found out Thursday evening when she showed up at the workshop without texting first. She had her laptop bag over one shoulder and her keys still in her hand, and the particular look she got when she was holding something together by force of will. She didn't say anything, she just sat down on the stool and opened her laptop. I didn't ask, I went back to the table I was working on. We stayed like that for an hour. She didn't work, I could tell from the absence of the typing sound. She just sat there with the laptop open and occasionally looked at the screen and occasionally looked at the workshop ceiling and said nothing. I said nothing. The radio played something slow, and the evening got darker outside, and the workshop lights went warmer. Around 8, she said. They rejected it. I know, I said. She looked at me. How? Because you showed up without texting. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't have anywhere else to be, she said. I set down the plane. I walked to the small refrigerator in the corner and got 2 bottles of water and brought them back. I handed her one and sat on the stool beside her, not across, beside, and she looked at the water and then at me, and something in her face that had been very controlled all evening came loose just slightly. 6 weeks, she said. I really thought it was right. It probably was right, I said. Wrong, client. She turned the water bottle in her hands. How do you keep doing it? Building things for people. Starting over when it doesn't work. I thought about it. Because the next one might be the one that stays, I said. And that's worth the ones that don't. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked back at her laptop. She closed it. I'm going to start over tomorrow, she said. Tonight I'm just going to be here. Okay, I said. We stayed until 10. She didn't work. I didn't press her to. We talked about other things, a book she was reading, a piece I'd seen at a market, the restaurant 2 blocks away that had just changed its menu, and she had opinions about. We ate crackers from the box I kept in the workshop cabinet, because neither of us had eaten dinner. At 10 she stood and gathered her things, and at the door she turned back. Jessie? Yeah, thank you for not asking. Of course, I said. She nodded, left. I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. Thank you for not asking. She hadn't needed me to ask. She just needed me to be there. I turned the lights off in the workshop and locked up and stood outside in the August heat for a moment before getting in my truck. The thing I hadn't been letting myself examine was getting harder to not examine. I drove home anyway, same as always. Marcus Cole came into Nora's life on a Wednesday. I found out about him the way I found out about most things that mattered, not because she told me directly, but because she mentioned him the way you mentioned something you're still deciding how to feel about. I had coffee with someone from the Hartley opening, she said on the phone. He does art investment consulting. He wants to discuss a project. What kind of project? He said there's a portfolio of emerging local artists looking for design partners. Marketing assets, digital presentation. It could be good work. I asked one question. Does he have a website? A pause. I didn't look. Look, she sent me a link an hour later. The site was polished and vague in the way things are polished and vague when they're trying to look like more than they are. Clean design, professional language, very little that was actually specific. The kind of site that cost money to look credible and revealed nothing. I looked him up another way. It took 20 minutes. Marcus Cole had operated under 3 different business names in the last 4 years. 2 complaints filed with the State Arts Council, neither resolved. A pattern: he targeted independent designers and photographers, offered them investment partnerships in emerging artist portfolios, collected upfront consultation fees for services that were never clearly defined, and disappeared when the numbers stopped making sense. I didn't call Nora right away. I sat with what I'd found and thought about how to say it without it sounding like what it actually was, which was me not wanting a man I'd researched inside of 20 minutes to be anywhere near her. I knew the difference. This wasn't that. The site was wrong. The pattern was wrong. She needed to know. But she also needed to make her own choice. So I texted her what I'd found. Links, screenshots, the complaint filings. No commentary, just the information. She didn't reply for 4 hours. When she did, it was 2 words. Dinner tonight? I was at her apartment by 7. She'd made pasta, the good kind, from scratch, which she only did when she was thinking through something difficult. The kitchen smelled like garlic and olive oil, and the particular warmth of a space that had been lived in carefully. She handed me a glass of wine without asking if I wanted one, and sat across from me at the small table with her own glass and her hands wrapped around it, and didn't say anything for a moment. He seemed legitimate, she said finally. The website looked real. It's supposed to. He knew people at the opening. Real people with real work. That's how it works, I said. You establish credibility first. She looked at her wine. I was going to sign a consulting agreement with him next week. I know. How much would I have lost? I thought about the complaint filings, the numbers in them. More than you could afford, I said. She nodded. Her jaw was tight, not upset exactly, more the particular expression she got when she was angry at herself. I recognized it. I'd seen it before when she'd made a decision that had gone wrong and had spent the aftermath deciding how much of it was her fault. Nora, she looked up. He's good at this. That's his job. You weren't foolish. You were targeted. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at her wine. I keep thinking about the site, she said. My site, my portfolio. She paused. I've never thought about who pays for the hosting. I was quiet. Jesse, it's not a big deal, I said. It's $40 a year. For 7 years, she said, very quietly. Jesse, that's not the point. I know it's not, I said. She looked at me. I looked back. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Charleston was doing what it did in September evenings, warm and salt-aired and entirely indifferent. Why didn't you tell me, she asked. Because you would have insisted on paying, I said. And then it would have been a transaction. And I didn't want it to be a transaction. She was quiet for a long time. Her hands tightened slightly around the glass. What did you want it to be? I looked at her. The question was simple. The answer had been simple for years. I just hadn't said it yet. Evidence, I said. She blinked. Of what? That I was paying attention, I said. That your work mattered. That you mattered. Nora set her wine glass down very carefully. She looked at the table, then at me. Her eyes were bright in the way they got when she was trying very hard not to feel something too quickly. Jesse, yeah. I need you to say the actual thing, she said. Whatever it is, I need you to just say it. I looked at her sitting across from me in her kitchen with her pasta and her wine and her 7 years of being the truest thing in my daily life. I've been in love with you for a long time, I said. I just kept finding reasons not to say it. The kitchen was very still. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not dramatically, just put it there. The way you touch something you've decided to keep. That night at the gallery, she said quietly. When you said, yeah, she does. Yeah. I stood in front of that terrible painting for 20 minutes, she said, trying to figure out how to feel about it. And, she looked at me, I felt like someone had finally said something true. Marcus Cole sent Nora a follow-up message the next morning, professional, friendly, a reminder about the consulting agreement. She forwarded it to me with one line, "What do I do?" We filed a report with the State Arts Council together that afternoon. I sent everything I had, the screenshots, the complaint records, the business name history. 2 other designers had already filed similar reports that year. The pattern was documented. The investigation that followed was quiet and thorough and entirely out of our hands. Marcus Cole stopped reaching out after the second week. Nora didn't talk about it much after that. Not because it hadn't shaken her, it had, but because she had a way of processing things by moving through them rather than circling them. She went back to her work. She picked up a new client. She sent me a photo of the fig jam on her toast on a Tuesday morning with the message, "You were right. It's exceptional." I saved the photo. I didn't tell her that either. What changed was the careful thing. The slightly held back quality that had been in her since the gallery night. It was gone. She texted the way she always had. She showed up at the workshop on Tuesday evenings and worked from the corner while I sanded things, and the radio played something neither of us had chosen. She brought the second opinion to things again, a typeface, a color, whether the new client's brief was asking for the wrong thing. It was the same as before. It was entirely different. One evening she looked up from her laptop and said, without any preamble, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "The curtain rod at the gallery, in the back room. It was 2 inches too low. The whole installation was off because of it." I looked at her. "You were looking at the curtain rod?" "I was trying not to look at you," she said simply. Then she went back to her laptop. I set down the sandpaper. I looked at her bent over her work, entirely herself. The workshop light catching the side of her face. I thought about 7 years of Tuesday evenings, of coffee she knew how to make for me without asking, of a website that had stayed online for 7 years on $40 a year, and her never once asking who was paying. I thought about a word I'd said at a gallery that had felt true before I finished saying it. I picked up the sandpaper, I went back to work, and I smiled at the table I was building where she couldn't see it. After the kitchen conversation, after I've been in love with you for a long time, there was a specific Wednesday I want to remember right. We hadn't had a formal conversation about what happened next. We hadn't needed to. Some things that have been true for 7 years don't require a formal conversation. They just require the acknowledgement. She texted me Wednesday morning a picture of her coffee and the message thinking about something. I replied, "What?" She sent back, "How long you've been leaving the porch light on." I looked at that message for a while. I'd never mentioned the porch light. She'd never mentioned noticing it. I turned it on when she was coming over because I knew she didn't like walking up to a dark house, had known that since the first winter she'd come to the workshop late, and mentioned it in passing. I'd started leaving it on after that, every time, without comment. She'd noticed. She'd never said anything, she'd just noticed and filed it away, and now she was texting me about it on a Wednesday morning over coffee. I replied, "You always noticed." She sent back, "So did you." I set my phone down and finished my coffee and went to work and thought about 7 years of small attentions paid and never announced. The coffee made right, the porch light, the website, the workshop key, the Tuesday evenings, the crackers from the cabinet on a Thursday night when she'd had a hard day and hadn't eaten dinner. None of it had been accidental. None of it had been nothing. It had all been the actual thing, said in the only language we'd both been brave enough to use for 7 years. That evening she came to the workshop. She didn't bring her laptop. She just came and sat on the stool and watched me work, and after a while, reached over and turned the radio to something she liked better, and I didn't say anything about it. We talked until late, not about the gallery or Marcus Cole or anything that had happened, just talked, the way we always had, easy and real and entirely ours. When she left, she stopped at the door. Jessie, yeah. She looked at me with that direct look, the one she saved for things she meant. I'm glad we got here, she said, even if it took forever. It didn't take forever, I said. It took exactly as long as it needed to. She considered that. Then she smiled, the slow, real one, and left. I turned the porch light on before I locked up. Old habit. Good habit. October. The light in Charleston in October was the kind that made the harbor look like a painting, gold and low and lasting longer than it should. Nora had a new project, a full brand identity for a small local restaurant, and she was happy in the specific way she got. When the work was going well, a little distracted, very alive, full of small enthusiasm she shared without entirely meaning to. She told me about the restaurant's color palette over the phone while I was driving home from a job. She told me about the typeface she'd chosen while we walked along the waterfront on a Saturday. She showed me 3 versions of the logo in my workshop on a Tuesday evening, and asked which one felt right, and when I said the second one, she looked at it for a long time, and said yeah, in a way that meant she'd already known. I noticed the way she said it. I noticed a lot of things. The web hosting renewal came due in November. I paid it the way I always had, quietly, without mentioning it. Then I thought about what she'd said in the kitchen. That's not the point. I texted her, hosting renewed. $40. Sending you the receipt this time. She replied within a minute. Why this time? Because you asked me to say the actual thing. This is part of it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, thank you, Jessie, for all 7 years of it. I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and went back to work and felt the particular fullness of something being understood without needing to be explained. We went back to the gallery in November. Not the same show, a different one, same building. A friend of Nora's had a piece in it. Small and careful and genuinely good. We went on a Friday evening, and it was the same white wine and expensive shoes, but different this time. Better. Nora wore the green dress again. She hadn't said anything about it. I hadn't said anything about it. But she'd worn it, and I'd noticed, and neither of us mentioned it, and that was its own kind of conversation. We looked at the work properly this time. She explained things to me, why a particular composition worked, what the artist was doing with light, why the piece her friend had made was better than it looked at first glance. I listened the way I always listened to her, which was completely, because she was interesting and she knew things I didn't, and I had never gotten tired of that in 7 years. Near the end of the evening, the same woman from before appeared. Or not the same woman, a different one, similar age, similar earrings. She looked at the two of us and smiled the way people smile when they've categorized something quickly and correctly. What a lovely couple, she said, and moved on. Nora looked at me. I looked at Nora. Well, she said, someone should probably correct her. Probably, I said. Neither of us moved. She looked at me for a long moment. The gallery moved around us. Voices, wine glasses. The quiet attention people pay to art when they're also paying attention to each other. Jessie, yeah, say the actual thing, she said. Again, here. I looked at her in the green dress in the gallery where this had started, where a word had slipped out and felt true before I finished saying it. I love you, I said. I've been loving you for a long time, and I'm done finding reasons not to say it. She held my gaze. Something in her face, the last trace of careful, came quietly down. That was less slow, she said. Progress, I said. She laughed. The real one. She took my hand, not dramatically, just reached over and took it. The way you take something that's yours. We stood like that in the gallery while the evening moved around us. The green dress, I said after a while. She looked at it, then at me. I know, she said. I wore it on purpose. I know, I said. She smiled. You noticed everything, she said. I noticed, I agreed. I just took a long time to say so. November, the days were shorter, and the Charleston light was doing what it did in fall, gold and low and arriving sideways through the workshop windows. Nora had finished the restaurant project, and it had gone well. The client had approved the logo on the first revision. She'd texted me the approval email with no comment, which I'd learned meant she was genuinely pleased, but didn't want to seem like she was making a thing of it. I'd replied, "Told you." She'd sent back a single period, which was her version of a laugh. Things had settled into their new shape, the same as before, in all the ways that mattered, and entirely different in the ways that also mattered. She still worked from the workshop on Tuesdays. I still left the porch light on. She still made the coffee right without being asked. I still fixed things around her apartment when she mentioned them, and sometimes before she mentioned them. None of that had changed. What had changed was that we'd stopped pretending it was something other than what it was. One Tuesday, she looked up from her laptop and said, "I want to show you something." She turned the screen around. It was her portfolio site, the one that had been running for 7 years on $40 a year. She'd redesigned it completely. New layout, new typography, all the work from the last 2 years properly presented. It was excellent, clean and confident, and entirely her. "It's been the same since 2019, she said. "Time to update it." I looked at it for a while. "It's good," I said. "Really good." She turned the screen back. "I wanted you to see it first." I kept working, but I thought about that. I wanted you to see it first. 7 years of work, updated and ready to show the world, and she turned the laptop around for me before anyone else. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be paid attention to. I'd been paying attention for 7 years. I was going to keep paying attention for a lot longer than that. The radio played. The sawdust settled. Outside, Charleston did what it did in November. Cooler now, the harbor quieter, the light going earlier. Nora typed. I built things. The stool held its slight indentation where she always sat. Some things that are worth keeping don't announce themselves. They just stay, and keep staying, and eventually you stop being surprised that they're still there, and start being grateful instead. What came after was quiet and good in the way that things are quiet and good when they've been building for long enough that the arrival feels less like a beginning and more like an acknowledgement. She kept working from the workshop on Tuesday evenings. I kept building things while she worked. The radio played. The sawdust settled. Charleston did what it did outside the windows. She brought me coffee the way she always had. The right amount of everything, without asking, because she'd been paying attention too. I left the porch light on when she came over late, because I knew she didn't like walking up to a dark house. Neither of us made anything of these things. They were just true. One Tuesday she looked up from her laptop and said, "I've been thinking about the first time I came to this workshop. What about it?" I told myself I came because the coffee shop was too loud. She paused. That was only partially true. I kept working. What was the other part? "I wanted to be somewhere you were," she said simply. Then she went back to her laptop. I set down the plane. I looked at the back of her head. 7 years of Tuesday evenings, of coffee she'd learned without being taught, of a woman who had come to my workshop because she wanted to be somewhere I was, and had made it sound practical for 7 years. "Nora." She looked up. "Yeah?" "Same," I said. "Every Tuesday, same." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, the slow one, the real one, and went back to her work. I went back to mine. It was enough. It had always been enough. We just finally stopped pretending it was something else. A month later, we went back to the second-hand furniture warehouse. She needed chairs for a client mock-up. 2 of them, wooden, simple. On the drive there, she said, "I promise I won't cause an incident this time." "You didn't cause an incident last time." I had feelings in a furniture warehouse. That's practically an incident. I smiled at the road. Fair. The same woman was at the counter. She saw us come in together, and her face did what faces do when they recognize something. The lamp couple, she said. You came back. Nora turned to me with one eyebrow up. The same look she'd had the first time, waiting to see what I'd do. Last time I'd said yeah and felt the truth of it and then spent months not knowing what to do with the truth. This time I knew exactly what to do. I looked at the woman behind the counter. Not yet, I said, but I'm working on it. Nora went very still beside me. I reached over and took her hand. She looked at our hands, then at me. Her eyes were bright. That's the actual thing, she said quietly. Yeah, I said, that's the actual thing. She squeezed my hand once, firm, certain, and didn't let go. We picked 2 chairs. One with a scratched leg I fixed in the parking lot with the kit I kept in my truck. One with a small mark on the seat that Nora said gave it character. We carried them up to her apartment and set them at the table and stood back and looked at them. They're right, she said. They are, I agreed. She looked at the room, at the moss green lamp, the oak table, the bookshelf that had hung straight for a year now. All the things we'd chosen together, in this apartment that had started as hers and had quietly, without announcement, become ours. She leaned against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. We stood like that for a while in the evening light, not needing to say anything else. Some things take a long time to get to. 7 years in our case. 7 years of furniture trips and Tuesday evenings and coffee made right without asking, and a website kept online for $40 a year. 7 years of the actual thing, said in every way except out loud. We got there anyway, and that was more than enough.